Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Age of Bison YouTube channel, where we are coming back with another podcast episode, but a little something different this time. So we are celebrating passing 500 subscribers just this past week. Pretty big milestone for us, considering the Age of Empires 3 community is not the largest one. So 500 subscribers is a pretty significant milestone for a passion project for us here, and for this group of guys that we've been able to put this together. So we're really thankful for all of you having subscribed and continuing to watch and engage in the content. So we figured we would do a nice little roundtable discussion amongst the people who work actually on this YouTube channel, both people who make thumbnails, who cast, who edit videos, and make up all this content. So we figured we would do something a little bit different. So I will be moderating and hosting this podcast episode. You will not be hearing my own personal thoughts and opinions. I feel like you hear enough from me personally. So I will be kind of overseeing the discussion that we are going to have. And the topic of discussion on this podcast is actually going to be about balance. What is balance? What does it mean to have a balanced game? And can we achieve it? This is a very pertinent conversation, I find, because primarily we have this pup that has currently being worked through in a new patch that's going to be coming out, and probably some future changes down the road. And so this is a pretty significant crossroads we find that the game is at and that the community is at, where people are kind of up in arms if you're staying in touch and keeping your ear to the ground as to what's happening with Forgotten Empires and the changes that they are making. And so we figured that we would just have a nice little discussion about it and go over those changes and see everybody's thoughts. And we have a range of elos being presented here. We have a range of thoughts being presented here. So very excited to get into it. So joining us today is myself as your host. We have McCleves, Dunamai, and Platypus Slayer, all part of the roundtable discussion. Hello, guys, and let's go ahead and get kicked off with this discussion. I have a few pre-written questions here, as you're all aware of. And so let's just start with the big elephant in the room, and feel free to, whoever wants to go first. My first question would be: is the game balanced now? Like right now, as we stand before the pup, is the game balanced? Do you feel like it's close to balance, or are we completely off from balance?
Maybe I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead.
In my humble opinion, I think we are very close to balance in the current patch. I think we have a few outliers. I think a lot of people would say Sweden is a bit of an outlier. Maybe China, and it has been for quite some time now. I'm not afraid to say it as a China player. But I think we're in a good spot. But then again, sometimes metas can become stale when things don't evolve. So yes, we are close to balance, but yes, it's also time for change, in my opinion.
Okay. Go ahead and Platt. What are you thinking?
I think first off, balance is pretty complicated across 22 civs, but I would say that as of the last patch, most civs have some level of parity. Like I said, there's always going to be your kind of S tier and your lower tier. Age of Empires 3 is very complicated. Something that I would say that I hear the most complaints about too is not necessarily the raw power of a civ, but that a lot of options that civs play are either quote unquote lame, or they feel extremely restrictive in their ability to play more than maybe one or two ways into the current meta. So I would say balance overall is pretty good. It's been a steady improvement over the last couple patches. It's just maybe the play styles often leave people maybe either a bit wanting or is a bit stale, as Dunamai said.
Okay, gotcha. Interesting thoughts from both of your sides. So then, McCleves, do you have an answer to that question? Where do you think the balance is right now, just generally speaking?
So of course I don't want to start off this podcast with agreeing with everyone, but in this case I kind of have to, because I do think that the win rates and the amount of, or the total power of civs is kind of equal in general. There are disparities for sure, but there's no civ that really sticks out to be insanely weak, for example, because I think that's something that you should look at. We always look at overpowered civs, but I think it's really important to also look at are there civs that really fall behind,
Mm-hmm.
And of course we need to be clear that we are looking mostly at 1v1 for to keep it a little bit simple. But in team, things are pretty different. And also, it kind of begs the question: how do you really define balance? But I guess we'll touch on that later. About the balance, yeah, I think let's just keep it simple. And the balance is pretty good, but there is still a lot of blaming and questions about that.
Okay, interesting. So I was not expecting all three of you to kind of have a similar outlook of the balance is actually pretty good. So I'm going to ask one question, and I'm going to lead that into another question because I'm curious now. So the thing is that you guys brought up certain examples, right? Dunamai started with certain Civ examples. In terms of what maybe looks like an outlier. I know Sweden's name is coming up, China's name is coming up, but when we talk about balance, what does that mean? So I know I asked the big question first, like, are we close to balance? But for each of you individually, go ahead and tell me what you think balance means. What does it look like? Does it look like a 50% win rate across the board, or close to a 50% win rate? Does it look like very healthy characteristics of the Civ and their identity interacting with each other, which is a little bit more not as much of that's more of a qualitative rather than a quantitative measure, right? So what do you guys think, if you could give a definition of what balance would actually look like, since you think that we're pretty close? Let's go ahead and start with McCleves then, because, he was the last to go this last time.
I'll start a little bit with side path maybe, but I think we could look at balance in a win rate. Does a Civ win more than it loses, or is it about equal? But you could also say that maybe a Civ has 50% win rate, but they lose against half of the Civs and they win against the other half. And is that really a balanced Civ in that case? I think that's a big question. So is this is a very good question. This is part of the question. Is a 50% win rate, is that really a balanced Civ? And if we say yes, then I would say then that has a lot of implications for which Civs are balanced and which aren't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Platt. What are you thinking? What would balance look like to you?
So, a lot of my background's in tabletop, and we used to do a very similar thing to a PUP in one of the games that I played. The balance was basically defined as a game state in which the player's skill is the predominant factor in both the experience and the application of that person's win condition. I played games with dice, so of course chance was always, a part of it. But if the matchup or the game or the unit was balanced, then it was player skill that basically maximized the use of it. So to me, that's what a balanced state is when you have two civs or builds or comps or whatever, and it ultimately comes down to what people could agree, and of course it's a subjective term, but that the general consensus would be that the winner was the more skilled player or smarter or trickier of the two.
Okay, interesting. All right, and then Dunamai, you want to follow that one up?
I would say, first of all, everything that Platt said, because it's really good. To define balance, you can also define what feels unbalanced is when you feel like you were the better player, but you were just in a horrible matchup, or you faced an outright no bad matchup Civ. Like, I don't know, maybe we can think about Release Sweden, where we're like, well, my initial rush failed. That was my only win condition, and I am doomed.
Yeah.
What I would say is, to add to this, is I feel like balance is also a state when you have kind of structure happening, when there's no Civ outside of that structure. For example, let me just take the example of a triangle of balance, rock, paper, scissors. You will have Civ A that counters Civ B, that is countered by Civ C, that counters Civ A, or stuff like that.
Right.
And you have this triangle of matchups. And at that moment, because I don't think we can ever hope to have a 50% win rate across the board for 22 times 21 different matchup. It's just impossible. But if you have these structures happening, like, yeah, Mexico's good, for example, I don't know, against Haudenosaunee because they have garrisonable hacienda. Yes, it's good, but we may have another civilization that has early siege that would be able to break said hacienda and get a lot of XP out of it. Maybe, I don't know, Aztecs. I'm just, winging it right there. But there's, at that moment when we have this matchup happening, all these triangles happening, reasonably often the game is balanced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So then the thing is that if all of you are walking away with, and Dunamai, what you said has triggered another question. But if all of you are walking away from this saying, no, we're pretty close to balance at this point, like we're almost there. There's parity, and so what we're all talking about is that you feel as if the skill matters the most, right? Let's stick with that. Do you feel as if the perception from the community though is that we're not close, and that there's so much discussion around what the pup means and how it's going to cause imbalance, and it's all this ridiculousness, and there's all this debate that is occurring across elo ranges? Do you guys get the feeling that perhaps there's a difference between what we could objectively call balance versus what is perceived balance in the community? I know that's a larger question. I want to begin with Platt on this one.
So, I think two things to consider is that we can look at something and say objectively it's probably pretty close to balance, but there's two factors. The first one is not all civs and matchups are equally likely to occur. Ottoman is win rate, right, is like, I think, let's say 55%, but it's, I think, currently the most popular civ. There's a phenomenon known as matching law where humans will overinvest in a perceived higher return behavior, right? So we can say, there's these 22 matchups, and across of them overall it's pretty parity, but for some people, especially at lower elos, they may only face 3 or 4 of those over and over and over again, which leads to a larger perception that the game as a whole is unbalanced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. McCleves, what do you think about that?
Yeah, this also ties in on what I said earlier, that if you have a 50% win rate, but you have very bad matchups and very good matchups, the game can feel really unbalanced, because you can have no chance when you face, for example, let's be hypothetical here, because I don't want to get in on the civ specifically yet.
Sure.
For example, you have you're playing a bit of a slow civ, Japan maybe, and you face Aztec, which are famous for their rush, and you just know you've got no chance, because that's just the matchup. And I feel like that is not a balanced game. Even though the win rate might be 50%, because there's another civ that you're in against.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
And that might be something that caused that causes this discussion. Yeah.
Okay. Dunamai, you want to follow that one up?
Yeah. About having that different dimension than win rate or balance. I think that we have a wonderful example in Mexico. In 1v1, I'm going to talk about 1v1. If I remember correctly, Mexico is at 50% win rate currently in 1500 and 1400 elo.
Okay. We can check.
So Mexico,
I'll check while you talk.
Is quote unquote balanced, but oh my god, does it feel horrible to play against. There's also this fun factor that is really important, and the reason why so many people hate Japan, like, oh well, he shined my hands, now I have to send my army over there, but his musketeers are faster than mine, so he'll get there before me. And all of these mechanics that are not unbalanced, but that feel unfun to play against.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the big factors, because you want to have a game whose mechanics are diversified, but at the same time you want it to be fun for both players. And that's a very hard balance, pun intended, to make.
Okay. So
I want to just hop on this really quickly.
Sure.
I think because the example of Mexico is a very good one, actually. I think one of the parts that can make people perceive a civ as unbalanced is predictability. So if a civ is very unpredictable, you don't know what they're going to do, you can't see from the deck, that's a huge problem. That is something that really puts people off.
Yeah, so let's go ahead. So taking a look at the win rate really quick because of the statistical claim, and then we'll backtrack from there. So from 1100 plus to all time, 48% for Mexico. For 1250 plus, it's 49%, and then for 1400, it becomes 47%. Now, I don't think there's enough data necessarily for Mexico games. So for Mexico games in total, we have 5,832 total games. Which is a decent sample size, I think, in terms of, or sorry, no, that was Ottoman. So for Mexico, it's 2,760. The win rates are correct. It's 48% still, but 2,760 games. So not enough to make any sort of definitive conclusions, I would say, but we're hovering just a little bit below 50%. So, but what you guys are saying, it sounds like, we're kind of bringing up, there's a little bit of a difference between, fun versus balance, right? I think that's a discussion, and we're also kind of bringing up the idea that, oh, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit of a difference as well in terms of Civ should always have options. So I want to get on McCleves' point, and I want to kick this back to Platt again. Do you think that in a Civ should always have viability in whatever matchup that they end up at? Because I know we're talking about, well, if Sweden just seems to be perceived to be the stronger, Civ or whoever, right? You're going to experience them more than you're experiencing a different Civ, right? And so you get this perception of imbalance that comes into the game because then you're like, well, I don't have any proper win condition. And so McCleave says that's not a balanced state. Would you agree with that sentiment? Do you think that Civ should always have an answer to whatever the situation may be?
So you're almost kind of cutting into, and these are kind of tied into each other a lot. So, it's not an either or proposition, right? Ideally, you kind of have flavors of both. That being said, you kind of have to ask what type of game do you want. One of the biggest complaints. So I played Age of Empires 2 semi-competitively for about 15 years, right? And I get a lot of flack from people that love Age of Empires 3 because they say it's boring, it's stale, it's the same thing, And I'm like, well, but there's this one villager difference, right? And they're like, well, everything's the same. And so in Age of Empires 3, people often like the asymmetry of it, right? You have civs like Lakota or Haudenosaunee or the African civs. And often the cost of these civs then has to be, because these civs have such unique flavors, is that they have to have holes in their roster so they can specialize in other ones, right? That's kind of like the design. Lakota has awesome cav, terrible siege. Haudenosaunee has great infantry, kind of mediocre cav. Ottoman had great army, but weak eco. Dutch had great eco, or Portugal had great eco, but not really spectacular military. There's all these trade-offs that occur.
Right.
And so it becomes this weird balancing act of, if a civ is too specialized, you get like a Lakota thing where you're either curb stomping or getting absolutely rolled, right?
Right.
And if that's bad or good, I don't know, but that is just the consequence of designing a civ that's specialized, right? So it's tricky. I think it's a tricky one, and it's probably not one that needs to be either or, because then you either have a civ that's all or nothing, or you have a civ that people consider bland or boring or not as exciting.
Interesting. Dunamai, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, and again, no shade to put on Mexico mains. I like Mexico as much as the next guy. But let's go back to the Mexico point a bit for that. And you have all of these options as Mexico. You need to scout the deck of your opponent with every age up, because he has 2 new cards, sometimes even 4 if he's an H4, because you have the 2. Oh no, it's US, sorry. If he revolves, you can have more. So you have to always react to what Mexico is doing. And Mexico is not doing, 1v1, not too OP stuff. We saw it in the stats. But again, there's this fun factor of, all right, I'm in a good matchup. He made, Peakies, and I have a lot of musketeers. I whittle down his mass. It feels good. Oh, I just forgot Mexico has Kerm in H2, and they got shipments of it. All right. So, there's this, he can send the answer, always. And the problem is, if you look, for example, at France, you don't have all of the answers in H2. You have crossbow, which are kind of lackluster against a lot of heavy infantry.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, when you look at it that way, when you can have a civ that has an answer to everything. I think it's good to have an answer to everything. Like we have Seaton's bows for Lakota, and you will be punished if you make 50 pikes into 50 Seaton bows, as it should be.
Yes.
But at the same time, you cannot have a civ that has the answer for everything. You have, I think, Platt counted 7 different counter to anti-cav for Mexico in H2.
Yeah.
You have skirms, you have heavy infantry, good heavy infantry, 2 kinds of different heavy infantry, a bit of pike. So you have all of this, and it feels sometimes overwhelming for the player playing the civ. If we look, at least if we look at the win rate, and also sometimes unfun for the other guy because he says like, all right, I have, let's say Dutch, I have good skirms. Great, I'm gonna use that power, make sure he won't be able to get a cav mass, or if he does, I'll go for a fast fortress, put up for Reuters, and suddenly you're against a civ which has lancers in H2, and you're like, where's my fun in that? Where's my moment to shine? Where's the core of my strategy against this civ?
Or
This
the
is
or the
what I
feeling
look
of back and
at.
forth, right, is kind of what you're getting at, I think, right? That feeling of like I had a chance to
Mhm.
win, right? So, and this is, and to expound on McCleves is that this idea of, to use Platt's definition, right? It comes down to player skill. But then what we're also pointing out is that we can't have you cover all bases because then, then it gets boring. But at the same time, if you don't have an answer, then you're just weak to a certain strategy. Like you're just flat out weak, and then it's not coming down to skill at that point. It's just coming down to composition, right? So McCleaves, do you want to go ahead and respond to these other two and expound upon your point in that?
Yeah, well, I think that if you play a civ that is pretty weak to a certain strategy, and you play against another civ that is really good at that strategy, we've got a problem. We want the game to, if we look at balance, we kind of want the game to, or the outcome of the game to be based on the skill of the player. But, or maybe, on some outplay that is, being smart, making a mistake, something like that. But if there's just a huge disparity between what the Civ can do, and this is something we see a lot in nowadays. This is something that is um, it's not something rare. It's not the game is asymmetric, and we like that. We like that. We like the diversity, but at the same time, it causes huge problems because some civs are just inherently weak to certain aspects or certain strategies, certain units, maybe even.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And so the thing is that what we're kind of circling the drain on, and this is the next big question. I'm going to keep harping on the point that we all said in the beginning that we are close to balance. Okay, we are close, right? But it seems like you guys are saying that the game is not fun. So, am I incorrect in ascertaining that? Do we think the game is fun? Is it fun? And if it's not fun, how is it possible that the game can be close to balance but not close to fun? Dunamai, I'll let you start with this one.
Well, I can tell you right now an example of a perfectly balanced game that is not fun. Rock, paper, scissors.
Okay.
Like, I mean, it's fun when you want to decide who dries and stuff like that. It's fun like for 2 minutes, and then you'll get bored because essentially, you have a 50% chance to win, 30%, 33% chance to win, 33 to lose, 33 to draw.
Right.
And that's it. And you figured out the quote unquote meta, which is, well, choose whatever you want. Even though there's really interesting papers on psychology on the fact that you can actually skew the game because of human psychology, but that's besides the point. The idea is fun, completely balanced is not completely fun, and I'm sure a lot of the audience is familiar with a game called League of Legends.
Yeah.
Have done that for years. The concept of perfect unbalanced, that at each patch you have strong contenders, strong AD carries, strong mages, strong tanks that are going to influence the meta, and you will have this kind of But the good thing that LoL was sometimes managing to do and sometimes wasn't is that you had a hidden meta of you have this strong meta thing, but you have enough meta thing that completely shatters the way you play the game. And more often than not, this hidden meta progressively becomes discovered, talked about, it becomes the meta, and you have this cycle. And suddenly the rock paper scissors, because in the last patch, for example, you buffed scissors, suddenly rocks become better, and you have this triangle. You feel like there's a flow running this triangle because you go from one point to the other, and suddenly the games feels refreshed regularly because suddenly you move this triangle, back and forth, and you have but now Mexico's strong. But what are Mexico's? Well, I'm going to change from Mexico because people are going to get mad. For example, imagine Dutch is strong.
Okay.
What is Dutch weakness? Well, they don't want to make early heavy infantry because it's food and wood. So maybe I want a cavalry. Maybe I want a civ that has strong siege on a cav unit. Maybe it's China. And suddenly you have this back and forth of thinking, all right, my main contender is this civilization. What do I do against it? And also, if I'm going to face Dutch half the time, because imagine they're OP, but I'm a French main, what do I do against them? Can I have a special build against them that will destroy them more often than not? That is off meta. And you have all of this theory crafting, all of this strategizing before the strategizing, which was one of the hallmarks of AoE3 and what makes it so different from all the other RTS, that you have a deck and that you need to prepare before the game. And if they manage to do that, that would be amazing.
So I'm going to push against you. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond to this specific question based on what you just said. I'm going to ask you one more time. Is the game fun? Just 30 seconds. Is Age of Empires 3 fun? Okay, it's fun. All right, you think it is. Got it.
Yeah.
And then it also seems like you're kind of suggesting that because you're saying to be able to pick and counter pick. And I'll give you 30 seconds to respond to that because because we do know that in terms of a 1v1 ranked scenario, which is what we're discussing here, is that you don't have the option to just, because if, let's say, in your fictional scenario, China counters Dutch is strong right now, I need to be picking China, but then it's a random matchmaking. So are you saying that balance would be better served by entering a lobby and then doing a pick counter pick? Or are you saying...
Oh, what I was saying is when you have this back and forth of civilization becoming stronger or weaker, or some parts, which would be better, of the civilization becoming weaker, you can have this interesting, thought put into, well, this part of my civilization became weaker, but this part became stronger. For example, is the Strellet now a melee unit? Maybe it is. Maybe your point, maybe your goal now is just to advance with your Strellet mass rather than kite musketeers. Or to go back and just to finish with, China is known to be vulnerable to cav, to heavy cav. But China has an army that is specialized in dealing with heavy cav. An army that you don't want to make. It's 2 pikemen and 2 goons, Keshik. But why is it there? The reason why it's there is just you can beat China by spamming Hussar, but Hussars alone won't win because you have this army that is specifically designed to counter this. So you cannot, be stupid and just spam Kill Kingdom Come your Hussar, because eventually the smart China player will just switch to that army because it's cost effective, because it will win you the game. And when you have this moment of, I have a weakness, but I have this kind of panic button, which is also the Manchu, for example, that temporarily or at a tremendous cost stops this weakness. You have this fun factor in the game because you have agency. And I think this is one of the main focuses, in my opinion, of fun, because you can make the decision to sacrifice something to cover this weakness.
Okay, interesting. Platt, I'm going to let you, that's a lot there to respond to. So, but it seems like we're kind of getting into, first off, is the game fun? we're near balance, but is the game fun? So Dunamai thinks so. He also seems to be also kind of adding the idea that the fun element of it is one, that balancing can be something of, different civs are up and down rather than on an even playing field, but then also flexibility within those individual civs in order to be able to respond to the varying strengths and weaknesses depending on the patch is what gives the game, I guess, that would give it the color of balance. What would you have to say to all that? This is for Plat, by the way.
Oh, as for if it's fun or not, I mean, it's hard sometimes to nail down like an either or response, right? But I would say that this game has some of the most amazing moments on it when the various kind of strategies and balances all work together to create a relatively coherent experience for both sides. And in non-sophistry, that I'm basically saying when two teams have a strategy that the other teams are able to identify, react to, right? Like I think it's kind of like what Dunamai was hinting at was, with these costs and these back and forth and trying to make the game engaging. A lot of the strategies that have come out in the past year, like we had a lot of old nerfs or old cheeses nerfed, a lot of old changes to breathe life into these older civs that had less options. But nonetheless, like, earlier today I got to cast a great series, and it was basically all legacy civs except for one game with Inca, one game with Sweden, which are our most established DE civs, right?
Yeah.
And even though it was a team game, not a 1v1, there was an absolute incredible back and forth at a very high level of games. People were going back and forth, tech switching, map control. I mean, there was absolute grinding of the fights. And then often I find myself in this modern times, I will play games against these newer civs or newly updated civs with an older civ, and the opponent just does what he wants. My ability to counteract him is often very limited, or I have very specific windows where he's able to ship units that have more value than me, or have more options than me, or have less punishment for conceding map control than me, and also more variety of openings. Harder to scout these things out now, right? And it often leads to a really bad taste where it's not that I played poorly, although there's always that. Like, there's always an element. It's never 100%, not a skill issue, right?
Yeah.
We often give ourselves, I think, a bias, and we do have to be honest as players that we're not as good as we think we are sometimes. And it sucks and it's tough. But over time, consistently watching and being as active as I am in this community, I consistently watch new players come in and be very excited to try out all of these different things, and then just have a lot of really bad tastes in their mouth from what people would consider lame or cheese, which of course is very subjective and differs person to person. And I think it's definitely a barrier to the continued success of Age of Empires 3. Of course, everyone has a different idea of what that solution is, and that's where it gets tricky and often too passionate. And it's why it's great to have a conversation like this with some structure. But I think that everyone has this like golden moment where everything kind of clicks, and even when you lose, you feel good. Like, I play against people that are often higher elo than me. Shout out to like Madonna and Patrick. I love those games, even though I lose like 95% of them, because they tend to play in a way that, for me, right, is understandable. So even though I am the lesser player, I am not as good as them. I understand what's happening. So when I lose, I can look at myself and say, okay, I lost here, or this happened. What's not fun, for me at least, is when my opponent's basically playing a different game with their civ, and they don't have to follow the same rules, do the same things, and then they win, and you're like, what happened? And they're like, civ selection micro. That's a negative experience. So I'll stop there.
Okay. McCleves, you have a lot to respond to, so I mean, I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Is the game fun, and more importantly, what do you think about this kind of idea of the back and forth aspect that Dunamai was talking about earlier, and adaptability?
Yeah, I've got a few points, but I'll start with this. I think that's something we maybe have ignored a little bit, but it highly depends, in my opinion, it highly depends whether you play one or multiple civs. So if you just have one main and it gets nerfed, it's not fun. That is not fun. You have to switch and you have to learn another civ, and it's just annoying, Or if it gets buffs, that's the other way. Like it's suddenly you win 100 elo and it's great. But if you play multiple civs, you can switch around a little bit, and it has much less of an impact. So that's something that I wanted to point out. Then on the part of so this also means this also means this what this point that Dunamai had about where the balance can kind of switch between states. Uh, this can be really fun for some people, but it can be really unfun for another part of the player base, and that is something that you have to kind of balance, and I think that's really difficult for devs. Um, and well, as far is the game fun, uh, I've left the game since the October. Well, I've played a little bit, because I still kind of like the game. I like to watch it and I like to watch people play it, but I can't enjoy the game when I play it. So my answer would be no. I don't know. Somehow it happens too often to me that I've played and I feel like I've played really well, and I just it was just the Civ was bad, or maybe and of course that can be me. I'm a very sore loser, so I think that's part of the issue. But I think that it's definitely a case of where there's definitely cases where you played well, you didn't really make any mistakes, and you just had no chance, and that is really not fun.
Okay, so I kind of, based on what everybody's saying here, I have another niche kind of follow-up question. Do we find that maybe there's an issue with the streamlining of macro in the game? So it seems like certain civs, what we're kind of getting around to talking about is that certain civs just have an easier time of establishing their economy, getting a boom going, and then having that boom become effective, effectively putting those resources towards an army and winning, versus civs that are inherently a little bit more complex, require a little bit more love and attention and skill to learn, right? So again, not to really single out anything specifically, but maybe it is easier, for the United States player who has a lot of tricks up their sleeves based on the Capitol building or using coffee mill guns, and their artillery is rolled up into one unit. It's cheaper, and all these other little things because it's a new civ and it's all these new ideas being put into a conglomeration of one, versus like the France player who's stuck to the same kind of cav semi-FF structure that they know and love. Is that what we're kind of getting at when we talk about this feeling of it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel like skill? This is where we kind of have a dip in the fun factor. But that's not to say that it's an imbalanced game, but rather it just is easier for one player and it's much harder for another. Let's go ahead and start with McCleves and work our way back.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a factor. Well, I have a very well-known hate for Japan, and Japan, I think this is a good example. So I need to be very careful to not because my hatred for Japan is kind of irrational at a level, but
Okay.
so I need to be a little bit careful of what I say. But I think Japan is one of those cities where it can really feel like they didn't really outplay you, but you didn't manage to outplay them, so they won, and that's a big problem for me. I think that's really bad design.
Okay. All right, Platt, you want to go ahead and...
Yeah, I think, let's see. It's not just like the civ structure design often, it's that there are units that simply require less input from the player. I think one of the hot topic units that comes up, I hear often, especially amongst, newer players or players that don't necessarily have the most elo, is the Soldado, right? The Soldado or the Janissary or the Sepoy, right? These are units that have incredible amounts of HP and you just can basically attack move them, right? They're very robust. And the way that you have to beat them, of course, is with a lot of kiting from skirms and or cannons. One of the current quote unquote cheeses is the Soldado FI, Fast Industrial, in which a Spanish player gets free, right? He doesn't actually have to, he gets a shipment, so it's not 100% free. There's an opportunity cost. 2 haciendas, right? So it's one of the best shipments in H3, and then on top of it, they get production of these units that are incredibly robust and easy to use. In order to kill them, you as the enemy, not only are you fighting something with cost-effective resources now against you, you actually have to outplay them, and so you're put at a disadvantage mechanically.
Yeah.
Against this. And so if you're like a pro, it's not necessarily bad. In fact, it's very beatable, right? Because you know the haciendas are coming, you can do certain things. But once it launches, it's basically neutering your skill at some level and reducing your ability, or putting more pressure on you. And then it feels bad because it's like the guy just right-clicked my base. He just walked and right-clicked, and his units were super tanky, and I made one slip up and I lost. Well, meanwhile, you know, I took the whole map. I took the trade line. I kited. I did this and that. And, you know, again, those are the things that I feel like bring out the most emotional responses.
Yeah, that's a good point. Dunamai, do you have anything to say to that?
Not much, except you were talking about streamlining of macro.
Yeah.
Ottoman have been in this game since release, and they already had this, you know, I don't need to click my villager to care about that too much, which has ruined the career of many of an Ottoman main when they forget they actually need to research some text to have more than 25 villagers, by the way. The thing is, there was always trade-off for that. Like, Dutch, they get auto coin gathering, you don't need to interact with the map for coin. Great. You don't have heavy infantry. Oh, I mean, you have pikemen, but come on, you don't have heavy infantry in H2.
Right.
And
not anymore. Not anymore. They may now, you know, but that's a different topic. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, let's just assume they don't.
Okay. Yeah.
But at the same time, you are doomed to have this skirmgoon in H3. You can't have any other way to play them. So you always had a trade-off of, all right, my macro is streamlined, and the but was the important factor, because why is Dutch not a must-have civ? Well, because you need to micro skirmgoon in order for it to be effective. This micro that you put on your mass, you cannot put it on your economy. But great, part of your economy is automatic, so it feels well-rounded.
Yeah, I see your point.
Now, when you go to, I don't know, the Spanish Soldado FI, what did you pay for? What was the trade-off? Well, not much. And the thing is, you generate a unit that costs gold. Others need to invest in high-cost estate with a very slow gather rate or take risks on the map and be rewarded for successful engagement, yada yada yada.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do that. And when you're in H4, you have a composition of Musk Cannon for free, and it feels super unfair because your Civ has to take risk and his doesn't. And I think that's what one part of the unfun factor is that, as Platt said, you have to outplay them, because if you, by default, they win.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of this is really good stuff. So we're really into the meat of the conversation at this point, and I want to kind of add a little bit of drama, if I may, to this. And so, because I'm looking at question 3, and so the idea of ELO has been thrown out there a little casually a bit. And so the question is, from my perspective, are we even able, like, are we entitled to have this conversation that we're having right now? So, because I think all of us are hovering anywhere between 1,200 to 1,400 ELO at this point, right? I would hazard to guess, right? Nobody above 1,400 here in this conversation right now.
1v1.
Not at the moment. I have been, but
okay. So all right. So we're generally speaking mid ELO range, right? So I mean, to some people's perspective, right, an 800, 900 player, they look at us and they're like, wow, oh my gosh. but we know, that we are very, very far off from what would be considered expert. So the thing is that there has been a bit of a debate about how the game is vastly different for somebody who is, let's say, average. So an average ELO player would be 1,000, a little bit, maybe 1050 would be the average player, right? And there's nothing wrong with being an average player. They're fine players. I think the skill level actually is probably higher in DE than it was in Legacy, I would say, but that's neither here nor there. we have the experiences at our range, right? And then you have the experience of those, let's say 1800, 1900, 2000, right? Do we think that like our perspective, like let's just have like a really like let's just ask the hard question: does our perspective on this game in terms of balance matter? Like everybody here, all three of you have stated experiences, personal experiences that you have had in 1v1. Does that matter? Because you are technically a lower elo player, one, and then two, who gets to decide, right? Because if we're talking about what it's skill, like it's a feeling of skill. We had this discussion in the Discord and on forums. I'm not going to name names, but stating that it's not down to skill when it comes to lower elo. That it does, you do get this feeling of this imbalance between civs because of the easiness of micro or macro or whatever it may be. And so really you understand what the difference of skill is when you get to the higher elo ranges, 1900, 2000 elo. What do you all have to say to that point? And, whether or not, I mean, obviously in some way you guys feel entitled to an opinion, but should that opinion matter in terms of the discussion on the balance of the game for Forgotten Empires? And also additionally, do you think that the skill question even is coming up at this elo range? I'm going to start with, I think I'm going to go ahead and start with McCleves on this one.
I might have to come back about this later because I'm still thinking.
I mean, that's fine. Yeah, if you're thinking about it, yeah.
I do have one point though,
sure.
And it's that we might be a little bit lower skill, but we still play against. Well, we're supposed to play against people if we play ranked, anyways, or of similar skill. So when we might make mistakes, but the opponent is also making mistakes. So doesn't that kind of cancel out a little bit at least? So that's a counter question maybe a little bit, but I think that's also a little bit of an answer to lower elos don't matter because they just make mistakes. Yeah.
So like the idea that if you're making a mistake, then you're not really understanding the civ, the true strengths and weaknesses of the civ. But then, well, if they're making mistakes, do they? Platt, do you want to go ahead and enter in on this one?
Yeah. So, I think there's a couple things. The first one is there is an assumption. It's not 100% perhaps mapped on, but there is a lot of validity to it, that the idea that the higher up the elo somebody is, that in general the more skilled they are in the context of a 1v1 situation, right? They may be a one civ or one build, one trick kind of pony. They may be someone that's played in multiple tournaments, but there is some proof in the pudding at some level, right? You can't act as if a 1200 elo person is going to consistently have as much knowledge as a 2100 elo person, right?
Right.
Just statistically, just like that being said, there's also, I think, a perception sometimes at the higher levels that someone that's lower than them is because of like just almost like a IQ drop thing, right? That like, well, if you're below me, you just don't understand it at my level. There's a quite infamous Rick and Morty meme that always comes to mind, right? Like, you must have a pretty high IQ to understand the complexities of Age of Empires 3, and then you watch them like Ottoman, like game after game or something, and it's like, So there is this like, I think really kind of, important part from both sides. And to the credit, most people, when they have and they actually explain things, they tend to be a little bit more in that stance of, I don't want the game to be miserable for everyone, but I do feel like perhaps there are some things that could be fixed. And it becomes, it's a really dirty question to be honest with you. Who is the game for, and what are the masses, and what's an acceptable level? I'll kind of sum it up as, I lose a lot to better players because I like to play better players and lose a lot because it makes me by a little bit of a better player. However, there's certain things that are just absolutely so miserable to play against that I don't care if they're better or worse than me. I'm just not having fun. And so it becomes that weird intersection, I think. And that is a very tricky thing. Again, I think to our devs' credit, they continue to look and try to address those negative play experiences. But, it becomes a question like, the China FF, how much of it's a skill issue versus how much is China legitimately suffocating at every elo?
Yeah. No, these are all good reflections. Dunamai, what would you like to add?
Not much, honestly. Yeah, I think a lot has been covered. Can you repeat the question, because I think we got a little bit off point.
Yeah, no problem. I was asking basically, are we allowed at mid elo ranges to have comments on balance? Because maybe
never mind. Yeah.
it does not come down to skill, at the lower elo ranges, and exactly, who is, and we can follow up as a follow-up question to continue to add to this, is that who, what should the game be balanced around? Because that's really what we're asking at this point too, is that what elo should this game be balanced around? Does it matter, like, at the lower elo ranges, what the experience is?
So what I'd say about this is, first of all, do we have a say in the matter? Everybody should have a say in the matter, but
well, you are French.
Yeah, but then again, will it be heard or even considered by Forgotten Empire? I mean, it's their game,
Right.
so at the end of the day, they make the call. But you talked about this infamous argument, and I think it's fair to put the name of Revnak on this, because he had a fair point. Is that at my level, I'm going to try sometimes ridiculous stuff, or make mistake. I forget that my army is there. I will make mistake. So it's like, if I'm doing a comparison, it's like having two different cars and saying which is the best car, but you let average drivers drive them, and the more average the driver is, the more there will be this element of chance. This part will be better handled by this said driver. And his point was, well, you need two top drivers to compare the car, because you cannot have one driver for each car, because it's 1v1. We will always have this difference in players. But if you can make sure this player pilots the Civ at the absolute maximum, then if there's a consistent difference in win rate, this will mean Civ A counter Civ B. The point is kind of valid, but it would be, in my humble opinion, if Pro didn't make mistake either, like zero mistake, which is of course impossible. And the other part is, but there's like 30, 40 people that we can consider like really high elo, and there's 1,000 of us. And what happens when the decision of the 30 makes the game unfun for this 1,000 of us? Suddenly it just feels like oligarchy, and for the worse.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was going to said I would come back a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to point this out. There's a very good point by Dunamai. Maybe it's true that the pros have a bit of a more valid voice, but there are so many more mid elo players that maybe we should listen to them, because they are the player base. They are, there's just more of them. So that's one. Secondly, I think we've also said that there's just maybe a case of player the fact that we play against similar opponents might actually mitigate a little bit this error chance, if you can call it that. And I hope that's clear. And then my last point, I am in disagreement with Patibus. He said that the devs have been looking to address these issues. I'm not sure how he phrased that exactly again, but in my perspective, this is not true. I see the devs trying to diversify civs, to bring more flavor, to bring more options to civs, but in the same process breaking the balance of the game, because they forget that certain interactions where they give a civ too many options, and they just sometimes it almost seems as if they don't care. I'll be honest. We've seen changes that were just absolutely ridiculous, like Factorious. Now, to their credit, they do come back to these, but they create a lot of problems themselves, and that's a huge problem, and something that I think kind of breaks the fun as well. Is the fact that there's always these constant changes, and they really shake up the meta or shake up the balance and standard strategies that standard meta, I guess, a lot, and it really you're in a very 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 fluid almost meta, and it can be a little bit obnoxious for you to know what you're going to face.
Okay. So for those who couldn't, the audio was a little shaky there, and I'll just clarify that what McCleves was saying is that at least in that last part, that there's been a lot of changes in the game, and there's been a lot of additions that have gone into civs, and so what ends up happening is that FE is creating even more and more interactions to exist within a game that then allows more opportunity for unfun moments or game-breaking moments to occur in a 1v1 setting, and that has become problematic. And so, and all this constant change, and then the constant addition of new mechanics in order to cover for certain bases, is becoming even more problematic. And for the first part, he was answering that the mid elo base is the player base, and so it should be listened to, although there is weight to a professional's opinions. Whatever that may mean, professional. But I know that he said platypus, and that he disagreed with you on that point. I'll give you now that opportunity to respond to that.
But I don't think we had any disagreement. I was just simply saying that there was a time in Age of Empires 2, and I forget the exact build that came out, but it was a build that basically, if you could click faster than your opponent, you won. Right? It was just so suffocating. I'm sorry, if you couldn't click faster than your opponent, you just won. And the highest level of elo was able to deal with it. And the Viper, who's probably one of the most consummate, esports professionals that there is, just an all-around pretty good guy. He made a video, and all the other pros at the time were kind of had an attitude of like, get good, right? And his response was, I make up 1% of the player base. Yeah, I pull in some revenue from streams and tournaments and advertisement. He's like, but if 99% of people are miserable, like, that's just a bad business model. And he's like, and as a pro, like I'm flexible. I'm confident in my ability to adapt with some of these changes. So he's like, I'll play what they make as long as it's fun for me. So if no one else is having fun, then no one's going to watch me play. No one's going to be proud of my achievement. No one's going to understand my, he's like, I don't benefit from this. And so it's definitely kind of a tough balance, right? Where, again, pros probably do have more knowledge on average than your average person. But, for the whole community, I think to be healthy, there has to be the ability for enough people to enjoy the game. I mean, one of the barriers to Age of Empires 3 crossing, the same thresholds to other theaters of like entertainment, right? Basically being able to have more viewers watch stuff. It's a very difficult game to watch, often. It's hard to understand these things. And so, these are all barriers that I feel like, way into this conversation of everyone wants the same goal. Everybody wants everyone to be happy, but, pros tend to, having put in a lot of time, tend to be a lot more married to certain builds, tend to want to influence the meta at their level, and feel that they put in all that effort, that they deserve somewhat of a say, where the rest of us, being more human and normal in our approach to this game, normal statistically, we make up like the vast majority of it. And so if we're all miserable, we're not going to play this game, and then the pros are going to be the only ones left, and then they're not even no longer a pro, because if you're top 10 and there's only 20 of you, right?
Yep.
You're now mid elo. So it's a balancing act, and again, I try to not to have a hard line one way or the other. But I think if I would say pros should have more weight, but there's much more of us, and both of these things probably equal out or are pretty close to equal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, oh, sorry. Go ahead,
okay.
Dunamai. Yeah. Hmm.
If I may, I want to emphasize on what Platt said because I think it's super important. What he said about the Viper, and if you remotely like AoE 2 content, go watch the Viper because it's super entertaining, by the way. He's a very chill guy, very polite. Um, by the way, you're right, Platypus, one of the most titled player of all time, even across sports, if we consider esport like another sport. Because there was a ranking, I think it was like 20th or something. It's amazing. And he's confident in his skill. Like he said, like if the meta shifts, well, I'll just study it and become better at it than anyone else, which is, in my opinion, like a very sports guy mind. Like well, they changed. I don't know the football size, not the ball size. Well, I'll just train to handle it better. I'll train to deal with the aerodynamics or stuff like that, because you're focused on the process of becoming a top player. And this mentality that has accompanied the Vipers for years has been one of the keys of the success. And then what I see changes, and our top player community said, this is terrible for the game, this is not fun, I can get the unfun part, but I want to know what part of it is just fear of change, and being this, I don't want to change because I was the best when the game was this way. And I really want to know, and not in an aggressive or aha kind of way, but really like, do our top level community fear change because they're afraid of not staying the best? Or are they just really uh, caring for us in a sense?
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of I think the big takeaway so far is, we're in the middle of this conversation, is that balance pretty close in balance. And it seems like the devs are maybe, they have, like, the professionals have their ear, but there is also this wide, vast community of mid-elo players that are still also kind of, they're a stream in which, feedback is being fed into the game. But the interesting takeaway is that although balance may be close, fun is not necessarily there. We're very lukewarm on that fun response, where it's just things just don't feel good. And so we haven't really discussed too much is exactly what the interaction between fun and balance is, because it sounds like, if it's not fun, then it's also not really balanced. But that's, we can get into that. But this whole discussion about this kind of elo range and who gets to say what and who should be heard out more leads me to my next question, in that, do we feel as if, and we can tie this into the fun and balance conversation, the difference between those two, do we feel as if the developers have given us a clear vision for where the game should be and where it's going to go? Because the thing is that we have all these changes. It seems like the pendulum swings back and forth, and there's a lot of community feedback, and there's this tug of war that occurs. And so we have all these changes that constantly happen, as McCleves was pointing out earlier. And all this content that's being added in. It wasn't too long ago that France and Germany and the Ottomans got massive reworks, right? And we're grateful for content. But the thing is that this leads to this question of, okay, but what is the goal? What's the point? Do they want to make it fun? Do they just want to make it balanced? What is the difference there? And has that vision really been communicated to us? Are they hearing out the higher elo ranges over the lower ones? Are the lower ones going to get? Are they being more considered than the higher elo ranges? Do we feel as if that as players we have confidence that the developers at Forgotten Empires have been clearly communicating a vision to us, and that we understand and we can get behind what exactly their endpoint of the game is? I'm going to give this one to Platt first.
Well, so to give like a little bit of context, I woke up this morning and saw that there had been a hidden change to Portugal. Again, I mainly played Age of Empires 2, but I have always loved Portugal as a civ. I think it's a really interesting design, which I know is not necessarily a popular opinion of people, but basically for some history context, Portugal in the Legacy Edition was considered one of the weaker civs in the game, if not the weakest. Very weak on land maps. Very just suffered. It had a water boom that wasn't even necessarily OP, but it was definitely one of the best. And it otherwise didn't really have much going for it in 1v1s on land. And so around 2020, the top minds of the time created the community patch, and they worked really hard to figure out a way to give Portugal a boost. They had the famous goof up where they gave them basically medicine for free, and Portugal was like ridiculous, right? So after some tweaking, they found like this 5% hunt bonus. And what it did is it allowed Portugal to play H2. And it's such a subtle thing, right? It's a 5% food difference. Doesn't sound like much, but it scales. The Civ scale, it just synergized with the Civ very well. And today the devs are like, well, we're going to buff this card that we introduced, Vitoria, and now we're getting rid of this, this thing from you. And it's like, so I have to do Vitoria now every single time. Like I used to be able to open ATP, I used to open Spice Trade Semi, I used to be able to open more water play, right? I'm now weaker, or as weak as every single Civ in the game with no eco bonus, unless I send this card. I don't have CDB, I don't have settler wagons. I do have an extra town center, but I have to pay for all my vills. So for the first 4 minutes of the game, I have the weakest eco, unless I take this one card, in which case it will scale okay at the moment, right?
Okay.
And it just feels really bad. And so, and the trade-off isn't something exciting, right? It's not like, hey, we're going to give you this new card that lets you take more trade lines, or maybe you can even rush in H2, right? Like it just, something changed and no one really asked for it. So it was kind of a shock. So and to reel myself back into like how the devs have the ears of the community, I like most of the PvP changes. We talked about GAT spam a couple times. That's been addressed. Some of the India stuff's been addressed. Brits have been considered a very oppressive civ to fight. They clearly have some thumbs on things, but especially with this last PvP, there's been a lot of changes like that everyone's kind of scratching their head and they're like, why? Like no one that I'm aware of asked for it. No one, and it doesn't feel like you have more options. It doesn't really feel like there's a vision. It's like you're just making me do this card. Like Ottoman's got a bunch of buffs, even though people felt like they were already overperforming, and they did buff a few things or nerf a few things for the Civ. But I think that's why this PvP had a lot of contention is, the last couple of patches you looked at, like the one you mentioned with France and Germany, you could look at what they were adding, even Portugal, and you knew exactly what they were trying to address. Holes in the roster, weaknesses in the meta, ways for the Civ to do what the Civ does best. And then this last PvP, it just, it's harder to decipher, and it doesn't feel as focused or relevant to what most of us are hearing.
Interesting. Okay, McCleves, if you want to go ahead and speak into that. Do you feel like a clear vision has been communicated?
You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, if still muted. I know he's here because he's in the chat.
Sorry.
You're okay.
So yeah, the short answer is no. I'll go into detail a little bit because that was really short. But yeah, every patch, I feel like, oh, this is pretty decent. They've got some good things. There's some changes that make a lot of sense. But then, why did they do this? And it's just that like they always make some change that seems completely stupid. Sorry, maybe that's a little bit offensive.
You can say it however you want.
I just feel like they always make this one change or maybe two that just don't make sense at all. And it just hackapels. We've got hackapels. We've got Vitorias. We've got. There's been so many things in the past. You can barely count them. It's just they just make the big blame this way, and of course they always come back and address these problems. But why don't they just do it right? And is it that hard to make something balanced right at the start? Do we have to live with something unbalanced after every single patch? Is that what this game is going to be like? That's a problem I have.
Okay, interesting. That kind of gets, and Dunamai, I want you to respond to that specifically because you were talking about, you did bring up League of Legends earlier and how this kind of like inherent imbalance that comes in with patches. Maybe this adversity can create new strategy, right? And then so an imbalance may actually end up being a consequential buff for other civs. So, go ahead and answer the question about vision from FE, but then also can you get into a little bit of what McCleves said at that last part?
So, again, not in any way, shape, or form associated to Forgotten Empires, so it's hard to say but exactly what's happening about vision. But I think, and I think we all agree on that the dev love AoE 3. Like, they want AoE 3 to be a fun game. But the problem is, again, and we're going full circle to pretty much the first question. What is fun? And Tilanus was a well-known modder for AoE 3 Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
So the definition of fun in a mod is not mainly, for example, about balance. And I don't mean that he doesn't care about balance, but maybe for him, balance is just, hey, I think he was on Napoleonic era. I want to have this historically accurate stuff because I want people to feel like they are playing like 19th century Unital, end of the 18th century units. And look at this, you can see with the Spahi and the Capiculu Spahi, which has this wonderful chest plate. I don't know how it's called. It's kind of a sun disk on the chest plate, which is, if I remember correctly, historically accurate and was part of some Ottoman armors. And the game is beautiful. It has never been as beautiful as now. And you can say that's cool, but at the same time, you need to please everyone. That's not gonna happen. Like the top player will say, "Oh, well, Italy's OP" and stuff like that. We will say, "Well, Italy's fun. We like it the way it is," and you cannot please everyone. To the second point that was said, a hard thing to do when you do balance is that, how do I say that? I'll get it in a bit. I'll let the other talk first.
Well, I do want to ask after, and you specifically, Dunamai, is that do you think a clear vision has been communicated? I know you said you're not affiliated with FE. We understand that none of us work for Forgotten Empires, but do you think that a clear vision for the future of the game has been communicated to the players and is something that we can get behind, or do you feel as if we have been kind of swinging back and forth?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Sorry, I answered the wrong
No, you're fine.
question. It was the second in the first. So I'd say no for very good reasons, and we talked about Plaid. Plaid hinted at this at the beginning of this podcast. The devs took a bullying round at the beginning of GE that was absolutely unheard of. Like, if I remember correctly, I've heard death threats were made to the developers. Like, what the fuck? Death threat over a freaking game?
Yeah.
Where are we? And that's, sometimes we also need to look at ourselves as a community. And I know that people, in this Discord didn't make the death threat, and there will always be bad apples in a community. But at the end of the day, sometimes we deserve the balance we're in. Like, maybe there'll be, and maybe it will be the Chevalier, I don't know, a third broken Dragoon. But the thing is, when people bitch again and again and again on Dragoons are the same guys that made death threats, you don't want to listen to them. You just, if anything, it will give you incentive to just say, fuck you, I'm gonna put another OP Dragoon in there because I know you hate it and now it's personal. Of course, they try, to ignore that, but at the end of the day, we're humans.
Yeah.
And it has an impact. So, did they communicate the vision well? No. Did they want to at the beginning? I think yes. Is this an act of self-preservation? Absolutely.
Interesting. Platt, do you have anything to say to that? I know he name dropped you, so.
Oh. I mean, there's some truth to that, you know. It's part of any dev or balancing that you kind of have, you know, you have your own goals and you can't listen to everyone, you can't please everyone. You know, at the same time though, there tends to be clear kind of boundaries and stuff you can communicate. You know, again, when I did community integrated development for a tabletop game, the devs were very clear on any new releases, what they thought the role of that unit was supposed to be amongst the faction, what was some of their initial concerns, and they would even sometimes put hard and fast rules of like, this is going to kind of replace this other unit in most cases, kind of thing. And it did allow a lot of really productive conversation. Now, of course, we had issues where top players would often try to influence. They would even fake reports and all sorts of stuff. So my background is how I got involved is I would run the stats on dice odds sometimes for them just to see if a battle report was faked or not. It's really tricky, you know. And of course, I don't expect devs to get something right every single time, but it does get extremely frustrating as a player. I think McCleves, you know, your words really resonated with me when you talked about like how long do I have to suffer, you know. As a port main, it's like this new card Fator. Okay, I got hand cannoneers. Awesome.
Here we go.
Right? I'm gonna be quick.
No, you're good. Go ahead for it. Go for it.
But truly, right? It's like, okay, ports are kind of a niche civ, right? I got some cool updates, and the first thing is, well, we're taking away your Mamluks, but we're giving you these pistoliers. It's like, okay, whatever. Then we had Fatoria, and the civ is like absolutely busted, and then they nerf it back. So I'm kind of like, okay, well, the card, you know, it'd be nice if the card came in again, but they at least, you know, I got these new shipments to play around, and now I'm being punished. I feel like my play style, right, for like the last 10 years, and it's like part of it's like, well, you need to adapt, but the other part is like, I'm playing the civ because I like this build, I like this play style. So what incentive is there for me now to change? Now it's all or nothing. You have to have Fatorias, or you know, you're just at a disadvantage. And so those type of questions come up a lot. And I think those are like McCleves is saying, though, what were you think, you know, where people really get frustrated? If you're a Swedish main and your torps get nerfed next PvP, I don't think anyone's surprised. When Fatorias got nerfed the first time, every port main, all 7 of us, were like, well, yeah, you know, that was pretty busted, you know, not a big deal. And of course, there's always a few outliers, but most people are reasonable. You know, I like to really push back against this idea that the mob is, you know, somehow stupid, or mobs can be dumb. But in general, people think things through, and there is a logic to their reasoning, even if it's not apparent. And with this, like, last couple patches, I feel like the devs have almost knocked it out of the park 100%. This last PvP, I've seen a lot of people be like, I don't understand, I don't get it. Why is this? Like, I like this play style. I don't feel it's, you know, suffocating. You know, you see like boosts that make sense, and unfortunately human nature tends to focus on the negative over the positive, and I think that's the hardest part about being a dev is you can be 60% right, 40% off, and people will think you're awful. You could be 90% right and 10% off, and you're still going to have to hear a very loud minority complain about that 10%. So, you know, I really respect what they do. I respect all the work that they have to put into it, but it's a tough thing. And I think this last PvP, they kind of missed the ball a bit more than we've become accustomed to, because they have done in a lot of ways really fantastic. So it's just tough. I think it's just one of those things that without a clear vision, it feels uneasy as a player base. Like, well, what's the end goal? Is this something I'm willing to tolerate, or is my civ just going to be ripped open, you know, feeling? This is emotional response, not objective, and then left on the roadside. And I guess in 3 years, when you get around to it, maybe I'll get a buff, right? That's not a good feeling for anyone.
Do you have anything to
Also,
add to that,
think,
McCleves? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things is that sometimes the changes that the devs might make are really affecting core mechanics of the game. So, for example, with this current patch, there was a huge discussion that spawned on our Discord and probably elsewhere as well about removing 3 vills from grids. This is such a standard card, you know. It's the core of the game, the very basis on which the game is built. It's like the same is true for units that don't follow the counter system. You know, Dervish, for example, has been mentioned a lot in the past. They got fixed, you know, but this is something that devs do like to um, change the core of the game, and I think they should change. You know, they I like the fact that they're trying to adjust the balance, but I would like them to just work on polishing the game, not shaking it up all the time.
Yeah, interesting. And there's also this. I feel like there's this idea that's coming through from everybody talking here that that there is this kind of I think Platt, you had mentioned it in a discussion that we had a while back as well, and I think McCleves is now touching on it now, of like this idea that there's certain things that are kind of like should be these kind of untouched systems, in which, like, you brought up the if I remember correctly, and this is I'm gonna be prompting a discussion with this, is that you brought up the Mexico revolts, and I know Dunamai, you said we don't want to keep bringing up Mexico, but it's a good example in that the idea of a revolt, right, is a very specific strategy of a sort of all-in, right? You've changed the makeup of your civ. Now you have specific benefits and bonuses for that revolt in that time to respond to a situation. But instead, they changed the rules now where you can revolt and then come back, and then you've moved up in age. And so this changes one of the kind of underlying natural laws, I guess you could say, of the game, in the same way that you have this counter system and you have the dervishes, right? And then so these changes come in, and so not only does it mess with the balance, it messes, or I should say, it's messing with the balance because this is the question: is it messing with the balance in order to make it more fun? Is that what we think is occurring here? Like, they're focused more on the fun and then it causes imbalance, or are we focusing so much on, and then we try to focus on the balance and then getting rid of the fun? Does that question make sense? Do we feel as if the developers are touching at really core mechanics that end up kind of assaulting the foundation of the game in order for the game to be more fun, or do we feel like it's something else? Dunamai, go ahead and speak into this for me if you understand the question.
Yeah, not only the question makes sense, I think it's a core question, and a lot of games, and I've seen some stuff in the text chat in the Discord. A lot of games have this spectrum between fun and balance. Sometimes it's perfectly balanced but unfun. I was talking about rock paper scissors. Sometimes it's completely imbalanced, but hell, the game is just so fun you don't care at some point. And you need to find this right balance. Again, the word is a bit overloaded in this conversation, and it's hard. And I think you're right. They are trying to break some part of the civilization to incorporate fun, and then see what happens, balance it out. Because the thing is, again, so much matchup, so much different ways to play civilization. This is hard to balance from the get-go, because there is no way in hell they will be able to forecast what's going to happen and how every player on the ladder will use a civilization. Because at some point, some goofball will find a broken build allowing them to, I don't know, reach 50k score in 20 minutes, or turtle with 7 towers in 10 minutes, or even, I don't know, rush with 1,000,000 units at 4min30, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And at some point, there will be unintended consequences. And I think they know that. And at some point, they're just like, well, let's make it fun and then see what happens, balance it out. I think it's one way of doing it, and it's one valid way to do it. Problem is, it needs to be fun for both sides. And to finish my point, I'm just going to go again, sorry, to Mexico. When someone revolts, you have a change in music. The game music changes for, I think, 3 reasons. You are 1 minute away from winning with a train monopoly. You lose an important building like a TP or a TC, or you revolt. So these are 3 moments which are do or die moment, important moment, when the music changed to say you need to focus because something is going down. And it feels like, this powerful move. Like it's like someone just you're doing fencing at someone, and the music tells you this person is going to take a pole axe now, and you're like, all right, I need to adapt right now. And you were with Mexico, and you can revolt 3 times in a game, and you're like, well, at some point he has a pole arm and he switches for a knife, and is it even fencing anymore?
Yeah,
Like
I see what you mean.
This is the problem with that, I think. And it's hard to have something that is super fun for the person playing and super fun for the playing, that faces it. And revolts were like this unfun mechanic at the beginning. Like, well, my revolt, failed, and I have nothing to fall back on. So they decided to balance them out, and well, you can make villagers again. So if you did enough eco damage, maybe you can come back into the game and do something about that. And then some revolt became completely ridiculous, and these were the unintended consequences. But we clearly see a focus on making the game more fun. The only thing I would say is keep in mind that there are 2 people in this game.
Okay. McCleves, go ahead and what are you thinking? I mean, that's definitely a lot to respond to, and I'm wondering how you think about this question of are there? I mean, gonna go back in the chat a little bit. Somebody said that there are no golden cows when it comes to mechanic. I don't think any mechanic is a golden cow. Do you think that there's maybe too much focus on fun, and would you agree with the sentiment that there are no golden cows, or do you think that there are? Do you think the devs are kind of attacking certain foundational elements of the game?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a few rules of the game that this game is a snowballing game, so everything you change at the beginning of the game, at the beginning of for example, let's say H1 is going to have a huge impact, absolutely massive impact, because it's a snowballing game. So if the larger you start, the faster you get rolling, and that's how it works. So I think there is a golden rule. There are some civs that do not have 3 fills, but they do have very good alternatives. And I think this is something we do not see on for example, the Brits right now, which also comes back to the question: Are the devs looking? Are the devs purely? Or not purely, but are they trying to make the game more fun? Yes or no? I would say yes and no. Yes, because we obviously see a very large flavor, very more diversity of cards, of units, and that obviously is directed increasing the fun and increasing the flavor. But at the same time, I do not comprehend how removing 3 vills from Brits is going to make the game more fun. I just no. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. And Platt, I'll give you the last word on this subject then.
I think something that is important to think about when messing with the kind of hard-coded laws of a game is what is the payoff. I look at, like, for example, the African civs. The African civs have a lot of totally unique mechanics, right? They have the granary, so they don't have to hurt as much. They have this influence, this extra res. And when it came out, it was pretty miserable to fight against, right? Because they just had more res generated. But now it's a lot more difficult for them to get. And then on top of it, they have this cattle economy that they have to micro, right? So they've added kind of and messed with core concepts of the game, such as herding, right? Because the granary, but even the granary is not an absolute win, right? Because I was goofing off with them the other day, and it takes forever to build, and if you shoot wrong, the herd wanders off, and it totally messes with your timings, right? Like they mess with and the pathing is bad for herds, right? So like over time, they've developed, I think, a system, at least the core mechanics of the African civs, that they have these trade-offs, but they do mess with the core fundamentals, and so it allows a lot more engaging with the opponent, whereas before they would just cover the map in TPs and have this magical 5th resource and just outboom you, right? And that was a lot more it didn't really add much, dynamic parts to the game as a player or as an opponent. It's good to mess with core concepts. Like I'm okay with 3 villagers being perhaps, shifted around or moved, but then the question has to be, what is the payoff to change this up? There's people, I'm going to pick on. There's 2 different types. There's the sweaty tryhard and the casual archetype, right? And if you're a casual player, you love the ability to come in and play with new stuff and to have great returns without much investment. And that's important because if every game is a chore and every game requires like a 10-year experience, you're not going to want to put your energy and time into it. But then the flip side is if you're someone that's playing the game consistently, that sweaty tryhard, you may be adverse to change, but you're also making a calculation of the same calculation. How much time do I want to put into a civ? How much time do I want to put into a game? And if you're just messing with core mechanics that people have been playing with for a long time, you often risk upsetting the existing player base and making them unhappy, and then not even necessarily getting buy-in from the more casual players because maybe they don't like it either. Maybe that payoff really wasn't that fun, so no one really wins. And I think that is a risk that every dev has to take. And I applaud our devs for having the cojones to look at the core mechanics and try to shift things up and make these meta shifts and continue to make the game evolve. But there's always that risk, and we may see that, and we're bound to see it. It's just statistical, right? That they are going to flop a bit. And I think as a community, and more importantly as a game team, how they recover and how they address when those inevitable slip-ups happen can really make or break a game. There's countless examples, we won't go into it, of other games where devs have messed with core mechanics and led to the game dying off, whether it's a FPS strategy game. But we've had other stuff. Total War is a recent example where they added all these mechanics. Players didn't really like them, and so they removed them, or they updated them and changed them, and now the game's a lot more enjoyable. So I don't think it's either or, but I definitely do think that just messing around with core mechanics to quote unquote making something fun and ignoring why that mechanic was fun for so many people in the first place or so utilized, change for the sake of change isn't a positive. I think I would go on that side, but it is a necessary evil that must happen from time to time for a game to grow.
Okay. I'm going to follow up a question to you, Platt, and ask, do you think that maybe the game is the focus then, that the game has become too casual? So maybe that's a more fair accusation to levy, that maybe some players say that, it's just we want to reduce the APM, we want to reduce the barrier to entry, and so we're just going to make it much easier to turtle, much easier to play defensive. We're going to make some units that you don't have to worry so much about your composition because units will now cover multiple bases, and you can just use these 1 or 2 units. Do you think maybe that's the direction and what people are kind of complaining about, or do you feel like it's something else?
Well, I think that when people say something's casualized, like they say it often derisively, but I think if you sit down and unpack with them, which I have, again, I'm a psychologist by trade, so of course these things, really interest me. What I find when I talk to players, like what is frustrating is the idea that if a player can just jump in and win with minimal investment compared to somebody else, then that person's like, why am I playing 1,000 hours in this game? Builds that are often hated on, and to kind of go back to the earlier point about quote unquote laming, almost inevitably is a build that requires less input and less timing and is more robust, right? So it is kind of the direction the game has been heading towards. There's a lot of builds and units that in RE, there was the 6-unit kind of cross counter system, and it was brutal. And there wasn't a lot of resources on the map, and so mistakes were horrendous. And I think that's one of the things that, to be fair, kept Age of Empires 3, on top of other things like the home city and people not necessarily being so keen on the time period, etc. That kept it back from being as successful as other RTSs, although, by most metrics it's been a success. And so the devs have really cornered on this idea of like, hey, you know what? You don't have to learn the game for 2,000 hours. You don't have to learn semi-FF, Great Plains, and how to play into France 10,000 ways. Like, just build soldados, bro, and have some fun. And it's nice because people can get together and play. Tonight I'm gonna go play a game of 40K, which is also horrendously unbalanced and is often called a beer and pretzel game because it's not very much balanced and there's a lot of goofiness and weird stuff that happens, and it's fine. Everyone enjoys it, but it's a very casual game, and in order for them to have any level of like continued buy-in, they actually have to patch the game. This is a tabletop game, so it's even a more difficult undertaking almost every month or two now, to keep the game going, because even at the casual level, people play for a while, they get a little bit better, they get a little bit more skilled, and then you realize that the new guy is on an equal playing foot. He doesn't know shit. Like, he doesn't know how to play, he doesn't know how to, quotes, right, he doesn't know how to play, he doesn't know how to do these things. It doesn't matter because his civ is, or his build is just overpowered, and then people don't play it because they're like, I'm going to go play a different game that rewards my skill, I feel like, for a longer period of time. And so I think that is the danger of casualization. I think that's the fear. I also think it's way overblown. I still think, again, I've been watching a lot of high level stuff. There's definitely a skill ceiling that is often
Okay.
not at the level of the people complaining about casualization, but it's a thing. So,
Dunamai, do you have anything to say to what Platt just said?
So I just want to say one thing about that is, have you ever, and for the all of us, have you ever been on an Azank stream? Like, he's by far my favorite AoE3 streamer, and I think the favorite streamer of a lot of people, because on average I see pros or semi-pros draining about 30 to 40 people. When Azamk is online, within the first minute you jump at 60, and his top is often 140, 150 people watching him. Azamk is known for use of unorthodox mechanics. Uh, I mean, I'm not the first person to use livestock, and Azamk have been known to use cow hacks for years. And he's entertaining to play. And he's this right balance of course, he can play standard and wreck 95% of the player base, but he's exploring the game, he's exploring the metas. And here's this interesting thing, and I want to link it to the 3 villager removal of Brits. Yeah, they removed it, but GMT now comes instantly, and Virginia Company, which was the cheaper manners, got a buff. So we have a clear message here from the devs. Like, we don't want you to play, the old way of playing Brits, but we want you to explore different and have clear option identities. And yes, skill should matter, and I 100% agree with Platt. But at the same time, I don't want our pro players to say Brits isn't playable now, and just completely, ignore the fact that they need to adapt, they need to be better. And for example, how about the fact that Skirmisher will be worse against Cav now? Well, Skirm was a big thing when you were playing against Brits. You need to, take this into consideration. Maybe Brits is better now just because they nerf Skirms. And, there's all of this here, and I really wish the high-level community was talking to us more about what was explored in terms of build, because I seem to hear sometimes Civ X is completely overpowered, and we look at the stream and they never play Civ X. Why is that? Why don't you show the dev why is this Civ overpowered? Show it on stream, show it on YouTube, show it. Make them know. And that would be kind of the answer I would give, is that there's a lot of laming and stuff that is branded lame on the forums. That's nice. How about we brand it lame on Twitch in front of the world for the whole world to see?
Okay. McCleves, do you have anything to say to what Platt and Dunamai are saying here? And you want to talk about maybe how do you feel like the game has become more casual, and that's kind of causing this, maybe causing some perceptions of imbalance, or definitely a lack of fun, perhaps? Or do you feel like that's a good thing, kind of? You're muted, by the way.
Wow, I keep. It's because I need to cough sometimes. And I don't really have a good answer to the question, to be honest. I think Um, yeah, I don't even necessarily feel. Maybe this ties in a little bit to an earlier question we had about our, is the game catering more to pro players or more to lower elo players or mid elo? Because I would say that if you are looking, if we state that the game is getting more casual, then that would mean that they're actually looking more at mid elo, which I'm not sure that's actually true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It probably is a little bit hard to you're probably right. It is a little bit hard to ascertain. But there's I guess there is this perception of how easy it is to defend, or like we talked about
Yeah.
Sodato FI or whatever, right? Like,
Okay, that's something I can talk about actually. I remember when Vitoria's first came out, playing a Haudenosaunee game
mm-hmm.
against Portugal, the new Portugal, and the dude just sat in base and did nothing for 40 minutes. And I unable to really damage him enough, and it was just GG because it just scales so well. Now they did nerf it, so I don't want to specifically say that Victoria's OP or whatever. But the point is, uh, when you get builds where you just sit in base, Dutch style, um, although Dutch do still need hunts at least, um, that is just not a fun. It's just not a fun way of playing this game, and it might be fun to do it, but it's really not fun for the opponent. So maybe we can call upon all these players to just stop doing this, but I'm not sure that will work. But yeah, I think that we've seen some changes that really did encourage uh, this this play style, and I think that there is a little bit of an issue. So we don't really. I would like the game to be a little bit more rewarding for aggressive play. That's basically it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we cover a lot of ground, guys, and we're coming up to the 2-hour mark. And I wanted to leave this, I wanted to leave this to the chat, but if they had any sort of specific questions, I know I kind of mention them every once in a while here, but I want to ask you guys really quick. McCleves, do you think the game is better now than it was a year ago?
No, but it's also not really worse.
Okay.
I don't think it's much better. In fact, I quit the game after the October patch. I really disliked the October patch. It was my personal thing. So for me, the game is worse, definitely worse than one year ago. But nice because I'm a house admin. So you see
Yeah.
it's very dependent on what skill you play, and that's basically the second part of the answer. It really depends.
Yeah, that's fair. Platt, what do you think? Do you think the game is better now than it was 1 year ago, or no?
This has been 2 hours of like subjective measures.
Yeah.
To guide things on, I would say that the frustration is, that comes from it is the fact that Age of Empires 3 has always been a diamond in the rough. There has been so much potential for this game, and everyone sees it. And I don't think anybody has a clear path on how to get to this vision, right? Or maybe they don't even have the same vision. I would say that over the last year, the successes have been that the player base is slowly growing. There's more people playing it on Steam. The increase of options. I mean, there's a huge silent majority of single players or only play with their friends and comp stompers, right? That often are invisible. And I would guess by the metrics that I've seen that as that continues, truly, the direction of this game is benefiting for them. It's bringing people in, it's bringing in revenue, gives more opportunities. As someone who plays competitively, I would say that the state of the game is kind of idle or decreased slightly. I've seen some people chat and they talk about the skill, and this is something that's kind of an ugly side of the game, and we don't have time to go into it. Maybe you and I could do a podcast on it later.
Yeah, we kind of briefly have mentioned, and we've been talking around it at this point of like casual play versus skill.
I have been, when I was so lucky to get it cast a high level game, and I went and rewatched, right? Because I wanted to do my homework on the 2019 ESOC Championship, and it cited a lot, and then the 2021, and there's no doubt that the mechanical skill of that player base was just off the charts, often compared to the people we have now. It's not that the people we have now are less skilled. It's just the skills, this different type of game where it's more about your builds and your card order, more say, than necessarily the visible interactions on the map between you and your opponent. And I would say that the card order side of things has been increased in strength, and the other side's been decreased. And I think that that is what's leading to a lot of contention and pull and push between the community, right? Because there's people, again, I say casual because you actually have a life, which is a good thing, right? You like being able to come in, do your card order, and have a pretty high success level. I mean, that's just human nature, again, matching law behavior. But then the people that have stuck in it are finding that they're running into a skill wall where it doesn't matter all the time that they put into the game and the mechanics and the understanding of matchups, because certain builds are just basically unpunishable or impossible to stop. And so I think that the state of the game is kind of like flatlining. It's not really going up or down, and we're trading kind of one idea of RTS for another. And how that pans out in the long term, I don't know. And I'm only one person, but I am kind of more on McCleves' side right now, where I'm starting to get extremely burned out with my time not feeling as rewarding. So that's how.
Interesting. Dunamai, do you echo that sentiment from these two? Where do you think the from where we are a year ago, do you feel like we're in a better spot?
I honestly think we are in a better spot. First, because there's more people playing this game, and second, because a year ago we didn't have that much content that was released. We have now major patches that are released at a slower pace, and that's a good thing, because one thing I would agree on with both of them is that you cannot change stuff too often, because you need the meta to settle down, people to realize what happened to theorycraft, or to change stuff, to get a feeling for the different matchup for the main civilization, for example.
Okay.
And now we'll have this time. Now the devs realized it. And yes, we'll have some, why are you making another high Milligoon again moment? Yeah. We'll have them every 6 months, but it will get patched. And the meta but we won't have this, hey, we have the cravat. No, please nerf it. Don't worry, we know the cravat. We have now the Hackapets. Oh, come on.
Mm-hmm.
This what civilization would get the OP goo? And now we'll have more time to adapt, to adjust with theorycraft. So I think the game is in a better state now. As for the laning part, again, it's hard because I'm not a pro player. I actually like to theorycraft. So I'm this category of goofballs that will just spend 2 hours on an Excel spreadsheet trying to think of the way to pop 16 halberdiers in your opponent's base as Sweden as fast as possible. And I like it. And that's what I do when I play this game. But of course, this skill can be easily copied, whereas the ability to micromanage units is not as duplicable as a build order. So I can hear the argument that laning is prevalent, but what do we make of people that theorycraft builds that have this skill of making a build order that's designed to be hard to counter because they spend time thinking about it without having them dictating the meta and giving away build orders that people will blindly bot and have success with. And that's again a hard balance. But I think the game is in a better state now.
Well, do you think that, and just really quick before we go into the wrap up, do you think that that theory crafting and the making of those builds that are duplicable to people across elos is maybe part of the issue that people are getting at in terms of balance? Like, let's say we have the fish rush with Sweden. It seems to be what you're alluding to. Do we look at that and we say, okay, well, You know, that's really cool that you theory crafted that, but the fact that the mechanics in the game even exist to make that possible, and then you made it and it's a viable thing, and people just have, like, as Platt puts it, like, just card orders that they can just replicate. Do you not think that speaks to how the game has become casual and kind of gets at the skill issue?
I actually love this question because I think I had a talk with a lot of people about this build, and yes, it can be oppressive, and I would be fine if it was patched. But then tournament happened. I had good success with this build, and generalSpades used the build too. But he was against Iwo, and I think that was one of my favorite moments of the tournament. Uh, I was casting it, if I remember correctly, and I was like, "Oh my god, Iwo has a fast Sweden deck as Hausa." So Iwo had theory crafted a deck that was built to beat the Fish Rush, and I felt super good about it because I was like, "This to me," and again, I know I'm biased, is peak Age of Empires 3 tournament because, all right, this Sweden build is happening. Spades made the original build, and I min-maxed it, but Spades and I were really close in the making of that build. So he's a fish rusher too. Iwo knows it. What does he do? Well, he tries stuff in skirmish with Hausa. He finds stuff that works. And then what do you know? He wins against the fish rush. And there's two categories of builds, because another build we could say is Gideon on Minas Gerais, with the 38 wood mill spam that was absolutely toxic. Because the thing is, yes, 16 halberdiers at 5 minutes is oppressive, but so is 80 mills in your face as wagons that have 300 HP that you cannot, micro away from. And again, there's this notion I was alluding to before of agency. In the game, Gideon versus Pete had no agency to beat that. It was just over. The Fish Rush, when you kill my 16 halberdiers, if you do it, well, I lie, face first in the ground. I have nothing else. And this is, to me, the difference. Like, you can bot a build, but at some point, people will realize if the build becomes, for example, I don't hope, but prevalent in the meta. People will figure out builds, and then we'll have this flowing meta again of, oh well, Fish Rush is popular. All right, let me just go do 2 towers within 5 minutes, and then laugh as the Swedish player just realized he could have topped instead and won the game. And then, well, tower becomes popular, so boom becomes popular again, and behind it you see the rock paper scissors of rush, boom, turtle, and that's what makes the game flavorful.
I see what you're saying.
Strategies.
Yeah, I see. I get what you're getting at. I don't know. Do we think we have time for one more question that came up in the chat, or do we feel like we're good? We're good here. What do you guys think?
I'm just go ahead.
We could do maybe a quick one and then just kind of start to move towards, I think, wrapping it up, because I think there's a lot of commonality of the threads between everything, and again,
right.
It's hard to disentangle things often, right? As with any human interaction, it's hard to find one thing in a vacuum, especially when you have groups of people doing something. I would say that, something else to think about is, with any game, there is kind of purity of form, right? What makes StarCraft 3 one of the most beloved RTSs of all time is there's only 3 civs. And each civ has such a clear identity. And often what happens is, as you continue to add factions and you add units, it becomes hard to keep those identities. And you and I have talked about this a lot as well. So I think, we're kind of at a tough spot where we've had a lot of content added. There's a lot to play around with, but a lot of old civs have kind of lost a little bit of identity. As we know, a lot of the kind of competitive side of things have really cooled off. You know, we're trying again to get it up and going. I think there's potential. You know, I've played some absolutely amazing games in the last few months, mostly this last patch, that are amazing. So there's something there, and I think it's a combination of the community, the devs coming together. You know, instead of trying to be like point blame or argue about stuff, I think moving forward, what would be healthy for everybody is start to, you know, we all agree that there's some stuff that's amazing, and start to focus on those factors and how do we make this a reproducible event to the point where it's stable enough and that people can start to do things. You know, I've been playing a lot of casual games, and I'm almost completely burned out of like team games, for an example, because so often it just comes down to one person wanting to do their own special thing or the other team doing their own special thing. And it's just kind of a mismatch. It's kind of awkward, especially with newer civs versus older civs. And it's just not very fun. It's not very exciting. It's not a lot of tech switches. You know, how do we sort through that? But I've had other games, and again, the ones I cast earlier today with like some of the old team players, that was just like intense, ball breaking, absolute skill based. You know, first an aggressive rush in a supposedly, you know, defensive meta. The second one, absolute back and forth. So you know, and I think the question is, which I don't have the answer to at this time, and I may never will, and one person probably won't, it'll require multiples, is how do we get from the chaos of most people's experiences and refine it into that consistent, like basically like a drug that we all have, where, you know, you're either a 1v1 or you're with an ally, but you've got this one unit comp and it's going into the other unit comp and they're pushing into each other, and then, you know, you do something tricky. Maybe it's like a Dunamai level like mind trip, you know, some underutilized mechanic flipping the matchup on its head. Maybe it's just you grind them down with good micro. Hopefully it's both of these options are available or occurring. And I just think that is going to be the secret. We have fertile ground. We've got all these changes, all these new updates, all these units, all these models, all this cool flavor and feeling of African civs with their different mechanics. Even the revolts from Mexico, I think, can be molded into something that's universally loved. Dare I say it, you know, and early modern warfare, there's just so much fertile ground. And I think we can get there. It's just going to be difficult and a long road. And I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, well, you know, I think that's a pretty good place to end off on. I think we, gentlemen, I think we covered a lot of ground here. I think there was a lot to say. There's even more to say. There's plenty more questions and discussion going on in the chat as we have this live stream going. You know, suggestions about maybe, different kind of sorts of rules when it comes to ranked versus casual, or, talking about the original unit counter triangle and how we maybe need to return back to that system and not have units break that system. And, this discussion can go on and on and on and on and on. But, I think the key thing that we've established here, if I may be so bold as moderator to say, is that we've presented a lot of questions, and not as many answers, but it's good to have people watching this, if the community is engaging with this, that, it creates a dialogue and it gets us asking the right questions. I think that's going to be always key to any sort of healthy community and a healthy way of approaching the game. Looking, within us as players to say, okay, well, maybe a Dunamai approach of we can come up with adaptations to whatever the patch is, and we'll be able to kind of form fit whatever our civ is to what's going on. But then also a McCleves approach in that, it gets kind of difficult to have to sit through these patches, and there's this constant pendulum swinging of changes, and there's a rewarding of a lower skill play as opposed to the higher skill, and then as you're saying, that there's still obviously a long road ahead of us, despite the fact that we may have come a long way, but without a clear vision, perhaps we're kind of left in the dark as to exactly what's going to be happening in the future. So but as a sign off, I wanted to get a few things out of the way. So the first thing is that I wanted to thank Forgotten Empires for producing the game and continuing to deal with us as a community. I appreciate all the hard work that you're continuing to put in. We know that it's a small team. Everything that we do and say here is out of love, and appreciation, and hopefully it will help. Because we spend a lot of time in kind of talking about the game, playing the game. That's not to say we don't have a healthy work-life balance, but just that, this is what we play and this is what we do. So, the thing is that, people may say, well, it's just a small game, get over it. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you got a point, but, we're hoping to kind of lend our credence, and a little bit of help to it. So, thank you to all of you that, as you continue to work and deal with this, that we're really appreciative of it. And we do enjoy the game despite, the comments that have been made here and us, venting frustrations and also singing praise. So thank you. I wanted to thank all the people who joined us for this roundtable. Thank you, McCleves, Platt, and Dunamai. I really appreciate, you guys taking the time to, sit down and really give your thoughts and feelings about the subject and answering these questions. You guys are fantastic. Fantastic players, fantastic casters, and fantastic co-hosts. Really appreciate all of you. And lastly, to the audience, thank you so much. 500 subscribers, nothing to sniff at. We haven't been doing this for very long, but you guys are very overwhelmingly supportive, have come out of the woodwork to leave comments to let us know you love the cast and you love the games. Thank you to everybody who's had their games cast, people in the chat, people in the Discord. If you're watching this, thank you so much for letting us cast over your games. You guys are fantastic players, fantastic people. And so thank you for our audience. Thank you for this Discord. We're really looking forward to the next 500 and the next 500 and the next 500 after that. We really want this to grow, and we think we have a really good thing going for us here. Once again, my name is SerSharkDad. Happy to be your host on this podcast episode for the Age of Bison YouTube channel. We'll leave our Discord link in the description. If you see any comments about us being a toxic community, only a little bit, but we do a good job. So thank you so much once again for tuning in. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.